Are we recording?
Yes.
Okay, well, welcome to our first session of this series. I forget the title. Pure Religion. This is our first week, and we have two Redeemer women. I'm going to claim them. Speaking with us this morning, Andrea and Haley, and we're just honored for them to be here to share their story and to just help us. This is a commitment that we have as a church to come alongside the commandment of Jesus to have a heart for the orphan. And we're excited to learn together. And all of us, whether we have adopted or are adopted, are called to this way because it's the way of Jesus. It's the way of the gospel. So I'm just especially blessed that y'all are here. And I just want to open this time in prayer. So pray with me. Father God, we thank you for setting aside this time in this place, in this season of life at Redeemer, for us to learn together about your heart for the orphan and what we might do as a body to come alongside you and what you're already doing among us in the city of Jacksonville and in our church. We thank you for Haley and Andrea this morning, and we ask that you would calm their hearts and help them to speak what you've given them to share with us, and give us ears to hear and minds to absorb, and Spirit, speak to us and quicken our hearts for what you would have us do with what we learned today. We give you this time. In your name we pray. Amen.
I'm going to try this out because I think this will help to bring my amplification. And what you can, if you want to just slide this under.
Okay.
Yep. That'll work. That should be on. Let me see if I can turn this up a little bit. That way you don't have to shout. Go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Andrea. I'm happy to be here with you today. And
This might not work.
yeah,
I
we're
know.
here. I'll just keep going while you guys figure with that.
Hey, Scott, can you turn that down to 0, please?
So today, our topic is trauma and the whole brain. And if you haven't heard that term, the whole brain, that comes from Dr. Siegel. A lot of what I shared today will be what I have learned from reading most of his books. He's got a lot. And he's a leading child development expert and talks a lot about brain development in children and even trauma and how it affects the brain. And so the whole brain has this idea of a well-balanced person is a well-integrated and functioning brain. All the different parts are working well together. But I want to start in Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image and our likeness, so they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Man and female, he created them. So we see here this picture of being created in God's image. And even within his image, we see a picture of community in the Trinity. And then he places us in a familial community. So, and then he's given us a physical means by which we connect to that community and how we feel and live to shared experience with the people around us. And when those relationships are working well, we feel that by peace and balance in our physical bodies. So just picture for a moment a mother who has conceived and carried and delivered and is now feeding her child. There's a shared complex biological progression of experiences taking place in each of them together, in their minds and their bodies and their souls, that God has strategically mapped out for their growth and their benefit and for their pleasure. And when trauma occurs to a person, in some way that perfectly mapped out complex biological connection is broken. and damaged. And that brokenness then informs and even dictates how they see the world around them and how they're able to respond to their family and their community. And they move forward carrying all that brokenness and damage with them until someone knowledgeable or trauma-informed comes along and helps them walk through a restorative process. And so the central part of our biological experience is in the brain, and therefore the majority of the effects of trauma are placed on the brain. So I want to start with a little bit of anatomy refreshment of the brain. I'm going to follow Dr. Siegel's hand-brain model. This is highly simplified. If you've studied the brain, you'll know more than I do, but this is a helpful visualization to think about the functions of the brain as we move forward. So so my hand right here and my arm is the spinal cord and the brain stem. And right here at the base of my palm can be what we call the survival brain. The vagal nervous system starts right here. And this is where fight, flight, or freeze functions happen. This is where you interpret a dangerous situation and react instantly. There's no long thought processes here. It's just an instant reaction to whatever situation you find yourself. Also automatic functions of breathing, sleeping, digestion, and so forth. And this part of the brain is most fully formed at birth. So when your child is born, they have a fully functioning survival brain. This also is known in Dr. Siegel's books as a downstairs brain, and sometimes I'll refer to it as that today. And other scientists call it your primitive or reptilian brain. And so then up to my thumb, and when I fold my thumb over and touch my hand, this is what we'll call the emotional brain. Your amygdala is here, your limbic system is here. And this has to do with expression and regulation of feelings, memories, relationships, and attachment. And then when you fold your four fingers over, if you orient it to your own brain, it would be just like this. All of this is your thinking brain, what we'll call it today. Highly sophisticated. Of course, you know your right and left brain is here. Executive functions, problem solving, creativity. You'll hold your beliefs here. You'll have impulse control from here. And like I said, it's highly sophisticated in contrast to the highly primitive basic downstairs brain. And this upstairs brain, interestingly enough, is not fully developed until you're about 25. Dr. Siegel refers to this as being under construction for the majority of your life. There's a huge burst of construction that happens early in life. And then when you hit puberty and teenage years on into adulthood, it goes under another massive remodel. So sometimes we say your child is doing the best they can with the brain that they have, and it's helpful to keep that in mind. Their brain is still developing, and what they can do one day may not be what they can do the next day, and their brain is literally under construction and changing. So like I said, the second and third parts are what we call the upstairs brain, and it's helpful to separate that from the downstairs brain to the upstairs brain as we move forward. And so when trauma occurs in a child, their fully functioning survival brain steps up to the plate to protect them and it does a great job in choosing what survival techniques they need to keep that child alive and keep them safe. And their still growing emotional brain and thinking brain are also affected and receive that information. But as we said, it's under construction, and it takes that information in and it moves forward with growing with that information. And so that's really written into the construction and the plan. And so the more intense and the more the trauma is repeated or new trauma introduced on top of old trauma, the more active their downstairs survival brain becomes. Often to the point of never calming down and never being able to hand over the reins to their emotional brain and their thinking brain when they need to connect with people, when they need to focus in school and learn. Sometimes their survival brain is so on guard, they can't even access their upstairs emotional brain and thinking brain. And so oftentimes children from hard places can present from an emotionally younger age, an academically younger age than their biological age. And that's exactly the reason for that. The verse that we go to a lot of times when we're thinking about orphans and widows, or orphans in particular, is James 1:27. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And so the part that stands out to me is in their distress. And today I want to look at how we can reach out to them in their distress. And so we need to keep that brain model in mind when we think about reaching out to them in their distress. And there's this idea of working from the bottom up. And what we mean by that is working from the bottom, the survival brain, up to the upstairs emotional brain and thinking brain. And because, like I said, we can get stuck in downstairs brain. And so we need to start there before we can move forward. So a child who's stuck in their downstairs brain may look like they're throwing a tantrum, or they're paralyzed by fear, or they're hitting and screaming and highly combative. Or they have excessive anxiety all the time, or sometimes in just a certain situation. And adults, we can get stuck in downstairs brain too, absolutely. Think about the last time you lost it and yelled at your children, or you said something you didn't really mean, or you got really combative with someone, and later you thought it was like, wow, that's really not how I am. I don't know why I reacted that way. Or you just have an excessive anxiety spiral. A lot of times that's you getting stuck in your downstairs brain. So starting from the bottom up, we're going to start with number one, our survival brain. And how do we calm survival brain? We give felt safety. So sometimes to keep everyone safe, if you have a really destructive child, you have to isolate them, but keep a close proximity so that they know that they're not alone. And you'll just keep checking on them and offering help and connection when they're ready. And when they're ready and it's safe to do so, you give felt safety by, if you can, physical connection, a deep hug, let them sit in your lap, rock in a rocking chair, use calming music, and depending on your relationship with them, if you're to that point, that physical connection is really, really calming. You can sing to them, pray for them, snuggle in bed. It's important to keep in mind, with your fully functioning logical brain that they're safe in the environment that you've given them, but they might not feel that and they might not believe that yet. So just don't get offended that they don't trust you. Just give them felt safety as often as they need it to calm their downstairs brain. Another great way is offering food. Many children from hard places interpret hunger pangs as frightening if they've been in a place where they have not always had access to food or as much as they need for their growing bodies. So offering them a snack when you're calming them down and giving that felt safety through physical touch is really helpful. And remember that we're repairing from the ground up. So this example of giving felt safety and connection is addressing their downstairs brain, their survival brain. And I want you to notice there's no discussions going on here yet. Their upstairs brain, where we usually come at a situation with logic and language, is completely offline. So discussions are not happening here. So number two, we're going to go to the emotional brain. And how do we address emotional brain? We give validation and understanding. So sometimes a child will offer their feeling. If they're giving a tantrum and they're just crying and talking, maybe you'll be able to pick up on what they're feeling. If not, you can ask gentle questions and make sure that they know that whatever they're feeling is welcome there with you. And just give validating phrases like, that would upset me too, or I'm sad when this happens too. And really important, try to match their body language and facial expressions. There's something called mirror neurons, and our bodies were created to connect by just mirroring what's happening to the person we're interacting with. So if they're slumped on the ground, just get down and slump with them or match their facial expressions. And still, so still there's no lengthy discussions here. Just ask simple, inviting questions to see how they're feeling, but don't push them. Sometimes just matching body language and facial expressions is enough for them to feel understood. And when Barrett was reading my notes, he reminded me that these practices are also helpful in the professional world to connect with someone deeply, quickly, match what they're feeling, say the last thing that they said back to them. I hear you saying this, or, oh, you're feeling scared right now, or, oh, you're worried about this right now. Just say it back to them, match what they're feeling, and that's how we feel connected and understood. without rushing into problem solving yet. So now we're to the upstairs brain, to the thinking brain, and now we can get to discussions. And just one quick reminder, keep the age appropriate and gentle and guiding in nature rather than firm and commanding. Say things like, I wonder if this would help the situation, or what do you think needs to happen next? Or how can I help you with this? And follow your child's lead here to see how much discussion is needed. And just a note, these 3 steps are important framework to keep in your mind, but see what works for your child, and you can absolutely stop if the first addressing the survival brain is enough, especially if you have a small child. And even with an older child, you can come back to this addressing the thinking brain later. And sometimes that's even better. At the end of the day, come back and revisit the situation and see if they want to talk about it, and help organize what happened with their upstairs thinking brain. So you kind of get to be citizen scientists and figure out what works for your child and what really calms them. So our children from hard places may have difficulty with healthy relationships and living in community, but with God and the right tools and a compassionate and determined community, healing and restoration is absolutely possible. This work is time consuming, but when we do these things, we're really changing their lives and affecting how well they can interact with the rest of their relationships in their life moving forward, and even their children down the road. So we started in Genesis at the beginning of creation, and now I just want to end with a couple of promises from Philippians, some promises of God's provision. Philippians 1:6, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it out to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. And another one I love, Philippians 4:19, and my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches and glory in Jesus Christ.
Does it sound good in the back? Okay.
When I need to draw,
This will be long. If you could slide that underneath, you're sure about right here. This will just do that.
can you hear me? Okay, I tried to organize my thoughts because I feel like I could talk about this for forever. As Andrea discussed, our brains need proper nurturing to develop and help us regulate our behaviors. So what is it in our earliest weeks, months, and years that helps wire our neurons in this safe and healthy way? I would argue, along with many other psychologists, that secure attachment is key to our development into healthy adults and keeping us healthy in adult relationships. So we're going to transition into talking about attachment. Just a little background, in 1950s, John Bowlby is the one that developed the theory on attachment. The primary caregivers who are available and responsive to an infant's needs allow the child to develop a sense of security. So the infant understands that the caregiver is dependable, and so they feel secure and they feel like they can go explore the world securely. So I'm going to start by drawing an attachment cycle for you so we can understand what's happening here. So a child has a need. And when they're a baby, they cry. And when they have a caregiver that is consistent and loving, the word is attunement. So this means that the caregiver knows what the child needs. They are attuned to what they need. This in turn builds trust. And the child knows when they have a need again, they can ask for that need to get met. Their caregiver will be attuned and they can build trust. Unfortunately, for a lot of children in foster care and children that are adopted, or even many of us in this room that mostly came from healthy families, this cycle gets broken a lot. So for an older kid, they might not cry anymore. This might be asking for permission. This might be following directions. So what happens is when this cycle gets broken, right, a child has a need. They're not going to ask for permission or follow directions anymore. They're gonna steal. They're gonna sneak. They're gonna get in trouble. This is gonna build mistrust. So you can see how detrimental that cycle can become pretty quickly for our older kids. I'm gonna do a quick bonus because I love the visual, and I think this is really important, especially because we're all adults in this room. What does this look like as an adult? As an adult, if you have maybe learned to trust yourself, like other people have disappointed you, or maybe you're not comfortable expressing a need, you now have a need, right? And instead of being able to ask for this need or have somebody meet that need, you're afraid to for whatever reason, you have anger. So you have a behavior that's from that anger. So now the person that you're in a relationship with sees this behavior out of anger, and they get angry. And they show their bad behavior. I'm not drawing this right. Okay, anyway, it ends up in a figure 8. And you get stuck in this cycle as an adult because maybe you got disappointed too many times, or maybe you're afraid to share your needs, right? So you could get stuck in here. And the only way to jump out of this never-ending cycle is to say, I'm actually lonely. I'm actually scared. I actually have a need that needs to be met. So maybe that helps understand what's going on here. So building on this theory of attachment that John Bowlby had, Mary Ainsworth furthered the research. She did a study called the strange situation. So she had 1-year-olds. Do I need to turn this on? She had 12-month-olds in a room. Their caregiver left the room. A stranger came in. The stranger left. The caregiver came back. And what she did was she studied their reaction to the situation and their interactions with the stranger and the adult. She came up with 3 different attachment types, and then later on they added a 4th. So there's secure attachment. This is the goal. This is what we're all looking for. There's also anxious ambivalent attachment, anxious avoidant attachment, and disordered attachment. Our brain regions, like Andrea was discussing, our emotional brain actually gets developed in the 3rd trimester, where our intellectual brain doesn't really start developing till like 2nd year of life. We're talking about a part of the brain that's already developed when these babies are born. So in that first couple of years, you have synaptic connections being pruned, you have epigenetic processes, so you're talking about the child's genetics and the environment coming together, and it's modifying their genes, and it's actually modifying the way their entire brain is wired. They say neurons that fire together, wire together. The behaviors that parents are inclined to do naturally, eye contact, face-to-face interaction, baby talking, holding, those are the ones that show to grow the neural regions in the baby that influence their emotional life. These behaviors mirror our child's neurons, like Andrea was talking about, in a way that helps them make sense of the world. So an example is you're bathing your 4-month-old, they're crying, you look at them, you're mimicking their face. Oh, I know it's so cold, but we're gonna be done soon. You're using a calm, simple voice, right? This is in contrast to your 4-year-old when you say, get out of the bed, get out, get out, get out. We got to go to bedtime. And they're like, but wait, the alternative there is bending down. Oh, you're having so much fun in the bath, aren't you? You're enjoying these toys, aren't you? Well, in 2 more minutes, I'm going to ask you to get out, right? So it's mirroring what these children are feeling inside of them to wire that so that they're making sense of their world around them. Thousands of these types of interactions, like I showed here, happen each day, and the baby and the caregiver are able to build secure attachment. These children, as they grow up, tend to be more independent, perform better in school, have successful social relationships, and experience less depression and anxiety. Insecure attachment is connected with all of the opposite. So Dr. Siegel guides us in providing 4 things to our children to build secure attachment. They need to be seen. That's not just with the eyes. That's what we were just talking about, mind sight, really seeing how they feel. They need to feel safe. So we need to avoid things that frighten them or hurt them. They want to feel soothed. So we help them deal with difficult emotions and situations. And they want to feel secure. So we help them develop an internalized sense of well-being. This is the understanding of that gives me most compassion for biological families and the foster care system, or even those that place their children for adoption. So let's think back to this survival brain that Andrea was discussing. And now let's imagine you have generations of a family that are stuck in survival mode with no ability to really grow this upstairs brain. So I'll ask for crowd participation. Think of something that our lower socioeconomic families might experience that would leave them stuck in their survival mode brain. Where's my meal coming from? Where's my rent coming from? Am I going to have a house? I'm not able to think like that. Even in mild stress and anxiety, I have a test tomorrow, right? I get stuck here. It's hard. It's hard to think of there. Also, a lack of support. Who's going to help me? I don't have anybody to help me. So if you're thinking about a mom that's constantly worried about where their next dollar is going to come from, how do they emotionally connect with their children? How are they able to mirror what's going on with their children? If they're giving a bath to a crying baby, maybe they have a blank stare because they're just thinking about their next month's rent. These insecure attachments also develop in families that remain together. Imagine somebody going through a tough divorce or being abused herself. How much emotional energy is left for her children? Maybe as you hear this, you can think about some things from your childhood or seasons in your own parenting where these 4 S's weren't provided to you or you were unable to provide them for your child. Stress is a part of life. The whole goal of attachment is to teach our babies, our children, how to deal with that stress. One study showed that we only have to get it right 30% of the time.
So now project.
So there's the hope. Oh, this is off? Okay. We only have to get it right 30% of the time, and that our children actually learn more from us repairing our mistakes than trying to hide or make no mistakes at all. So a lot of times when we're able to do the repair work, we're able to turn more toward that secure attachment. When we discuss children in foster care or that have been adopted, we have a new dynamic because every single one of them has experienced an attachment disruption in their lives. So some of the insecure attachments, we have anxious ambivalent. So that's when the child is not sure if their needs going to be met. So sometimes this circle works for them, and sometimes they cry and cry and cry, and they fall asleep in the next room, and their brain tells them, oh, I must have met my need, right? And now this cycle has broken for them. And so ambivalent anxious is kind of like, is my need going to be met? Is it not? So then it's able for them to, then they lack the capacity to care for other people because their concern is, how do I get my needs met? Then there's dismissive avoidant attachment. And so typically those are children who assume that nobody is going to provide for them. As a result, they're not able to become close to others. They struggle with social connection and they can't ask for help. They want to be near their caregiver, but they don't interact much. So in the strange situation that I talked about, these are the children that when their parent left the room, they did not cry. When people watch that study, that's the child they want, right? It's easier for us to have a child that does not melt down when we drop them off at a daycare or at school. But these are the children that actually had the highest level of cortisol, which is our stress hormone, measured in their urine. So this is very stressful to these children to live in this avoidant attachment cycle. Again, they have to become focused on meeting their own needs. And disordered attachment is kind of both, right? Comfort and fear from their caregiver. So they're really not sure where they fall. It's very chaotic. They might get really close to people and then push them away out of fear of losing that relationship. So in all of these insecure attachment styles, what you find are children that need to meet their own needs. They can't rely on their caregiver. So we experienced this as foster parents. We had a 6-week-old baby. He was home for 2 weeks. He moved with another family for 4 weeks. And by the time he got to us, he cried for 4 months, right? But when he was with his parents, he was calm. So what we heard, or what we've understood, is that you can plan for it to take twice as long to do the healing and repair as it does to do the damage. So when we adopted Israel, he was 8 years old. Twice that would be 16 more years. He's 24, but that puts him through all of the ages of puberty. And the hormones in our body, when we go through puberty, actually tell us that we need to rely on ourselves. They actually push us away from adults. So things get really complex for these children really, really fast. As Andrea said, the prefrontal cortex isn't developed until age 25. This is responsible for integrating all of our other brains. It gives us the ability to be emotionally balanced and self-aware, responsive instead of reactive, intentional with our bodies, empathic and intuitive. And what the research shows is when we have secure attachment, we're able to build that prefrontal cortex. There's a woman, she has a talk on YouTube. Her name is Jennifer Kolari, and she does calm parenting. And she says that it's actually our job as parents to just be a prefrontal cortex. So when we're annoyed that we've told our children the same things 10 times, it's because we're doing the job of their brain that's not fully developed yet. Okay, so when we think about trauma, we often think about physical and sexual abuse, major accidents, events, or war. But I'm going to challenge you right now. So this study really opened my eyes. It's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. On it, what they realized was it actually happened in an obesity clinic when people were not able to lose weight, and they just started dropping out of the study. And they were like, or they were losing weight and then they started dropping out of the study and gaining it back. They were like, what's happening? So what they've done is they've connected adverse childhood experiences to actual risk for physical illness in the future. But they don't just talk about physical. There's 10, sorry, I'm losing my place here. So there's 10 things that they count up, and included in it is, did a parent ever swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Did they ever grab you or throw you or hit you? There's other, did anyone in your family, did they show you that you were special and important? Did they look out for each other? Were your parents separated or divorced? They're putting these types of things on the same level as physical and sexual abuse that we would think of. So in that regard, 2/3 of participants had at least one adverse childhood experience. And then of that, many more had 2. Sorry. These were mostly white, middle, and upper class college educated people in San Diego. So I would challenge you to start thinking about trauma in a personal regard. And what Daniel Siegel's book, Parenting from the Inside Out, is really convicting me right now. I'm almost done with it. But he shows how our experiences growing up are really impacting how we're parenting. Right. And so what happened with us as we started adopting children that came from hard places, or our children just started getting older and experiencing hard things themselves, is all of that bubbled to the surface. And when that bubbled to the surface, it clashed, and we were constantly being triggered by our own children. So it was hard to put in the work that we knew that needed to get put in because we were struggling ourselves. The big thing with trauma, and the big thing that Daniel Siegel talks about, is it's how we make sense of it, right? So do we understand our parents' emotional neglect through a lens of their own trauma and difficulties? Or do we interpret that neglect as a problem with ourselves? I'm not enough. I'm too much. I'm bad. I'm not worth the emotional attention I'm craving. And he argues that if we can make sense of the world around us, that's where the healing is. If we can understand and process it, it's not necessarily what happened to us, it's how we make sense of it. Unfortunately for our children in foster care and those that have been adopted, they experience trauma early in their lives, and based on many factors, they make sense of this trauma in very different ways. For those of us that parent these children that struggle the most with their trauma, it is very taxing. I don't know if I have time to share a little bit about what we've been through, but we knew everything. You know, we had learned about, there's something called reactive attachment disorder. We had learned about this. These are children that are going to push away. And we ended up adopting Israel when he was 8 years old from foster care and had 6 wonderful months, really, truly. A very compassionate child, looked out for others, wanted physical closeness. And it wasn't until about 6 months in that we began to see the signs of reactive attachment disorder. So these aren't things you always know. And still for 3 years, anyone that saw him would have never known what was happening inside the home, right? He's very charming, he's very sweet, but he really struggles. He really struggles. He's currently in a therapeutic environment that works 24 hours a day on attachment and trauma. And he's been there for 1.5 years. And there's progress, but it's slow. It's slow progress for these children. So I'd encourage you, as you begin to think about parents that are fostering, or parents that have adopted, or even parents that have been through hard things like divorce or abuse or anything that is going on, there's probably some more going on with their children than we're seeing on Sunday morning, or you're seeing when you're out with them. And so to really want to come alongside that parent is to really get to know them. It's really to spend time to build that relationship so they feel safe opening up to you. I'm an open book. I'm happy to share any of our story with anybody that's interested. It's been a very difficult and challenging road for us. We did not feel the support that we needed, which made it very difficult and actually caused even more trauma for us, that it was hard for us to trust people and trust that they would help when we were asking for help. So we've done a lot of healing in the past 1.5 years, and it's my goal to, I don't know, you could say normalize this, but help people understand trauma and how it affects families and how it affects these children. There's a lot of resources that I recommend. Andrea brought a bunch of books. Daniel Siegel's great. He has a few books. One that she doesn't have is the No Drama Discipline. I really like that for how we approach our children. Nancy Thomas is the attachment guru. Karen Purvis, she has over there, wrote The Connected Child. She deals a lot with kids from hard places. Jennifer Kolari, as I mentioned, does calm parenting. She talks a lot about mirroring neurons. She applies it to using it in adult relationships, using it at work. It's very fascinating. The Verse Childhood Experience, there's actually a website, ACEs Too High, and that explains more about how you end up more at risk for high blood pressure, high cholesterol, lung disease, from just these adverse childhood experiences. There's some, other books that I haven't read, but they're on my list, called Attached, which explains adult attachment relationships. How to Do the Work is not a Christian book, but it's a good perspective on our ego and how to really break things down. There's attachment quizzes you can do online to see how you are with your spouse versus your parent. A lot of people don't even have secure attachment until they get married, until they become an adult. So I really appreciate all of you being interested in this. Hopefully you followed my thought process there. I'm in grad school, and I know it was more study focused and things like that, but I love to talk to anybody that has any questions or is interested.
Thank you so much.
So I think one of the things that we learned today is the need that we weren't aware of. And I think we've learned to be more understanding and empathetic when we see children, whether they're from intact families or not, when they're misbehaving. I know sometimes the tendency is to think, why can't the parents? When in actuality, it may be so much deeper than that, so that we can be a church that responds differently, then we can chart a different course. That's my hope. Thank you both for sharing from your hearts. We're going to have a sound system in here next Sunday so that way we won't have to play. I wasn't sure how many we would have today. And I thought we'd get sound from here, but instead we got feedback. So next Sunday, we're going to have a better sound system. If you missed some of this, that last part that Haley was giving without the microphone, we've recorded it. So you can listen along once we get it posted. I'm going to turn this back on. We do have time for questions. I'm going to need to leave. So what I'll do is I will leave. Scott, if you'd be willing to, I think it'd be good to get the questions recorded. If you'd be willing to stop recording, which we're recording on this one, and shut this down when we're done, that'd be great. I will leave it to the questions. Thank you. And somebody pray at the end too.
I'm there. I got you. Is there anything on the topic? If there's not, I understand, but as you look at a church, because we are a church, is there anything that comes to mind to you that you wish you had as you were discovering and finding yourself in the midst of navigating these cycles and learning about your own children's needs that would have been helpful?
And repeat the question for those online, please.
So the question is, if there's anything specific that we would have liked to have had in regards to support when we were going through this process of fostering and adopting.
So off the top of my head, I would say this. I come from a family that's long been exhausted and in survival mode. There's not a lot of support there on the emotional level. One thing I've loved about Redeemer since September 2003 when I joined is the intergenerational capacity. And I think for our family, it would have been really helpful to have some type of mentorship, some type of, even if it was a person or a couple or whatever that didn't necessarily understand foster care and adoption, didn't understand trauma, but wanted to learn alongside of us or wanted to just be there for us. We lacked a place for an emotional outlet as we were dealing through this and navigating, because all of our support system has young kids and they're also exhausted. So, and now, a lot of our support system is made up of adoptive and foster families. So they're extremely exhausted and it's difficult to be there for each other as that emotional support. So I think, capitalizing on the intergenerational aspect that Redeemer has could have been really helpful for our family.
So the question is, are
When you're
there,
fostering, you're dealing with children that, same.
so the question is, are there respite programs to help facilitate taking breaks in care?
So I can answer that because we were foster parents. Well, I think I can answer it. So you can leave a foster child with a trusted adult for, maybe somebody else knows this, it's like 48 or 72 hours, 72 hours. Beyond that 72 hours, they do have to be a licensed foster parent. They have to go through the classes, be background checked, all of that. There are people that do it. There's availability if you reach out to the state and ask for it. What we ran into was we weren't interested in leaving our kids with strangers, and we weren't interested in leaving our kids with people that knew less than we did, or wouldn't at least contact us to say, this is the behavior I'm seeing. How do you think I should address that? So we actually did use our in-laws as respite, and that's precisely what happened. It was like, well, we can handle this, and this is how we perceive the situation. And it ends up, oftentimes being more detrimental. Unfortunately, we were in a place where it was a safety issue, so we didn't really have a choice. But, even in our case, Israel was adopted. And we needed respite and a safety level. But again, you also have guilt as a parent of putting those behaviors into somebody else's home. Feels like a lot of, you don't want to do that, right? So yes.
So it sounds like my daughter babysits. Her first interactions were mothers over, being there with the mom. So is that a method that would work well? Decide see before develop the relationship already.
So she's asking if somebody wants to do respite, coming to learn from the mom on how to handle things. And I think that would be fantastic. I think that would be amazing. And that's why it has worked for us with some people, is because they do want to take the time to learn and get invested. And yeah, that'd be huge.
There is specifically a foster care program where a foster family can have another like life license, basically, to be like actually. They went to do the background screening, so that when we left town, sometimes they bring kids for us, but they had to stay in our home. But when you're dealing with kids that have attachment issues, exactly like Julie says, I have been a foster parent for over 4 years and I've never once used respite because it's literally driving children that are scared of them. And when you're already struggling with attachment issues, so it has to be, for us, the only people that have ever watched our littles are either or my own kids, and even twice in the past 2 weeks, Thomas and I just tried for dinner, and it was a ridiculous disaster in our house. And after it happened the second time, like he's old enough now that he's able to recognize I did this because I needed to. So sometimes respite is great for hearing, but in reality, it's really hard to people step in.
But like you were discussing, even the mother's helper idea, I mean, we could have really used someone to come in and wash our dishes and fold our laundry or play with our girls so we could focus. There's a lot of opportunity for coming alongside.
We're so thankful for all that you shared with us, and this is so good. I think it's the beginning of a bigger conversation, and I hope that we all leave with lots to pray about. But these women, they come by what they know through blood, sweat, and tears. So I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful. So let's end in prayer. Father God, this is a holy place that you call us to walk with you in. And so we just ask for your blessing, especially this morning, upon these women. Bless their their work this last week and their work going forward in their homes with their children. Thank you for their sacrifice and for their obedience to your call. And we just pray that there would be deep and lasting fruit in your kingdom because of their yes to you. And we pray, Lord, that you would open our eyes to the invitation and give us the courage to say yes and follow their example and your example to do hard things and to love your children well. Help us, Lord, to be sensitive to the needs around us and to be willing to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations to be your hands and feet and to learn from these little ones. May you grow your kingdom through our church in loving and serving children who come from these hard places. And we thank you for this time. In your name we pray. Amen. You guys did a really, really great job.
I know what to stop.
And come back next week.
Well.